The Imperial Japanese Navy's headquarters in Tokyo was receiving the morning reports on December 8, 1941. Admiral Osami Nagano reviewed the details coming in from Pearl Harbor with quiet satisfaction spreading across his face. 8 American battleships lay damaged or destroyed. Nearly 200 aircraft had been obliterated. Over 2,400 American sailors and soldiers would not be coming home. The Pacific Fleet of the United States now sat crippled in Hawaiian waters, unable to project power across the ocean. What Nagano could not have known that morning, what no officer in the entire Imperial Japanese Navy could have possibly imagined, was that a collection of aging, rusting vessels sitting idle in American shipyards and reserve anchorages were about to transform everything. Within just 2 years, American industrial output would reach levels that Japanese military planners had flatly declared physically impossible to achieve. Ships would launch from American yards faster than the Imperial Navy could even catalogue them, let alone attempt to destroy them. The Reserve Fleet awakening. Tucked along the James River near Fort Eustis in Virginia lay one of several American naval graveyards. Here, dozens upon dozens of vessels from the First World War sat in various states of decay and preservation. The exact count remained unclear, though observers believed well over 100 ships occupied the anchorage. Throughout the 1930s, as congressional funding dried up and political will for military spending evaporated, these vessels had received minimal attention and even less maintenance. They existed in a strange limbo between usefulness and obsolescence, too potentially valuable to break apart and sell for scrap, yet too expensive to maintain properly. They seemed too outdated to matter in modern warfare. Then December 8th arrived, and everything shifted. The morning brought workers and civilian contractors rushing to the anchorage. They came from Norfolk Naval Shipyard and from dozens of private contracting firms. The reactivation orders that followed were deceptively straightforward in their wording, yet breathtaking in their scope. Every vessel capable of moving had to return to active service, and it had to happen immediately. The initial surveys painted a picture of enormous challenge. Engine rooms stood flooded with corrosive saltwater. Machinery had corroded so severely it barely resembled its original form. Ventilation shafts housed bird nests from years of abandonment. Some decks had sprouted vegetation after sitting undisturbed for so long, yet within weeks smoke began rising from funnels that hadn't burned fuel in more than a decade. Ships that hadn't moved under their own power since before many of their crew were born now churned through the water once again. The USS Bridgeport stood among the first successes. Originally a German passenger liner seized during the previous war, she now belched black smoke from stacks that had been cold and silent for years. By the spring of 1942, dozens of these resurrected vessels had emerged from the reserve fleet, been refurbished, and pressed into immediate service. These were not the glamorous capital ships that headlines celebrated. Instead, they were the essential workhorses of naval operations. Repair ships that could fix damaged vessels without requiring lengthy journeys to distant shipyards. Tankers that extended the operational reach of combat ships far from home. Cargo vessels and transports that kept supplies and ammunition flowing to distant theaters. Their reactivation provided immediate reinforcement precisely when America's naval forces needed every available hull. The Japanese intelligence failure. Back in Tokyo, Japanese naval intelligence was attempting to assess what American shipbuilding capacity might actually deliver. The organization itself remained understaffed and struggled with fundamental limitations in gathering reliable information. Their pre-war analysis had painted a specific picture. America, they calculated, might produce roughly 500,000 tons of naval vessels annually under peacetime conditions. Under maximum wartime effort, merchant shipping production might perhaps reach 2 million tons. The analysis seemed reasonable on its surface. Japanese analysts had counted American shipyards, calculated available steel production capacity, and assessed the available labor force. Naval officers who had previously served in Washington reported back on what they had witnessed firsthand. American labor unions frequently clashed with management. Racial divisions ran deep throughout society. Peacetime complacency had infected the entire industrial sector. One report specifically noted that American shipyards operated well below their theoretical capacity, with workers actively resisting requests for overtime work. These observations, while accurate for peacetime conditions, fundamentally failed to anticipate what American society could accomplish when truly mobilized for total war. The analysts recognized labor disputes without imagining those same unions voluntarily pledging not to strike for the war's duration. They saw racial segregation firmly embedded in American culture without envisioning how warfare would crack open industrial opportunities, however limited, for minorities previously excluded from defense work. When some intelligence officers suggested that American capacity might be substantially higher than official estimates, their reports were often dismissed or minimized. The prevailing strategic theory dominated Japanese military thinking. The Kanti-Kessen concept, or decisive battle doctrine, assumed the war would be resolved within a single year through one climactic naval engagement. From this perspective, long-term American industrial capacity seemed almost irrelevant. The war would be decided before new American ships could be launched. This assumption proved catastrophically wrong. By 1943, American shipyards would produce over 19 million tons of shipping, approaching 10 times what Japanese strategic planners had deemed remotely possible. This represented far more than a simple intelligence failure. It was a fundamental and catastrophic misreading of American society's capacity for rapid industrial mobilization and transformation when facing an existential threat. The Maritime Commission's revolution. The United States Maritime Commission underwent a complete metamorphosis almost overnight. What had been a New Deal agency managing the gradual decline of American merchant shipping transformed into the driving force behind the most ambitious shipbuilding program in history. Admiral Emory S. Land commanded this transformation as the Commission's chairman. He possessed something rare in wartime leadership, a deep understanding of both engineering challenges and bureaucratic machinery. His operational directive carried disarming simplicity: build ships faster than submarines and battleships can sink them. The Commission's expanded wartime powers allowed it to commandeer existing shipyards, allocate scarce materials, direct the labor force, and orchestrate the entire production ecosystem. This coordination, operating mostly invisibly to Japanese intelligence analysts who focused on counting finished ships, would ultimately prove as decisive as the vessels themselves. The Liberty ship program provided the template for this mass production revolution. Based on a practical British design created for simple cargo vessels, the Liberty ship incorporated principles designed specifically for rapid construction by inexperienced workers. The design deliberately chose older, proven technology. Reciprocating engines replaced modern turbines. Straight lines and simple curves substituted for complex structural shapes. Every design decision optimized rapid construction over elegance or advanced capability. The first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, launched on September 27, 1941, and required 244 days of construction time. That seemed acceptable at first. By early 1942, construction time had plummeted below 100 days. By late 1942, some shipyards had compressed the process to 50 days or even less. The learning curve accelerated constantly and relentlessly. The human factor received equal attention. The Commission established new training programs that could transform farmers, factory workers, and other civilians into able seamen in a matter of weeks. The Merchant Marine Academy compressed its traditional 4-year program into just 18 months. By war's end, more than 250,000 new merchant mariners had emerged from these programs, creating essentially from nothing a merchant marine force larger than Japan's entire maritime workforce. The Kaiser innovation, Henry J. Kaiser, arrived in shipbuilding with absolutely no maritime experience behind him. What he possessed instead were revolutionary ideas developed while building massive dam projects across the American West. His approach stripped shipbuilding to its fundamentals. Break complex construction into simple, repeatable tasks. Maximize parallel work happening simultaneously. Invest heavily in worker training and support. At his Richmond, California facilities, Kaiser assembled 4 separate shipyards that would eventually grow to contain 55 building ways. He implemented assembly line principles never before applied to shipbuilding on such a scale. Traditional shipyards had always built vessels sequentially from the keel upward, one ship at a time, moving through stages of construction. Kaiser's yards operated differently. Separate sections were constructed simultaneously in different assembly areas. Bow sections were built in one location, while stern sections were built elsewhere entirely. Deckhouses arrived fully equipped with plumbing and electrical systems already installed, ready to be lifted into place. The workforce transformation proved equally revolutionary in its implications. When skilled shipbuilders proved too scarce to meet production demands, Kaiser didn't simply lower quality standards or abandon the work. Instead, he fundamentally redesigned the labor process. Rather than training complete shipbuilders, he trained specialists for specific tasks. A welder might master a single type of joint perfectly and perform that same joint thousands of times across different ships. A painter specialized in particular surfaces. An electrician focused on specific systems. Kaiser's vision extended far beyond the yards themselves. He identified every obstacle that could potentially slow production and systematically eliminated it. When housing for workers proved inadequate, he built entire communities. When workers needed medical care, he created what would eventually become Kaiser Permanente, a revolutionary healthcare delivery system. When childcare facilities couldn't accommodate the children of his expanding workforce, he built 24-hour nurseries operated continuously to support workers on multiple shifts. By mid-1942, Kaiser's yards were completing Liberty ships at a pace that would have seemed like fantasy just months earlier. The Richmond yards alone would eventually produce over 700 vessels before war's end. While specific record-breaking construction times circulated in wartime press accounts and deserve careful scrutiny, the sustained production pace remained utterly undeniable and historically unprecedented. Pearl Harbor's strategic paradox. The attack on Pearl Harbor, while undeniably successful as a tactical military operation, contained within it profound strategic miscalculations. Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku, the architect of the assault, understood American potential better than most of his superior officers did. He had studied at Harvard University. He had served in Washington. He had witnessed American industrial capacity firsthand and understood its potential. His often quoted prediction about running wild in the Pacific for 6 months or perhaps a year reflected this deeper comprehension, though the famous "sleeping giant" quotation attributed to him likely never left his mouth. The immediate success of the attack seemed to validate the Japanese planning entirely. Yet critical vulnerabilities were missed or dismissed by those who planned the operation. The Pacific Fleet's aircraft carriers were absent from Pearl Harbor when the bombs fell. More significantly, Pearl Harbor's physical infrastructure remained essentially intact. The repair facilities survived, the fuel storage remained unscathed, the submarine base continued operating. These facilities would prove essential to American recovery from the initial blow. Most importantly, Pearl Harbor unified American public opinion with sudden, transformative force. Pre-war America had remained fractured and isolationist in sentiment. The attack shattered this division instantly. Workers who might have resisted overtime requests now volunteered for double shifts. Labor unions suspended planned strike actions. Women entered the industrial workforce in unprecedented numbers. The production statistics tell the story of this transformation vividly. Monthly ship deliveries accelerated throughout 1942 in steady progression. Each increase represented not merely additional shipyards entering full production, but existing yards becoming progressively more efficient. Workers accumulated experience and skill. Production systems became increasingly refined and optimized. The production acceleration. By mid-1942, American shipyards had begun achieving production rates that Japanese planners had absolutely insisted were physically impossible to reach. Monthly Liberty ship completions climbed steadily and relentlessly. 5 ships completed in January 1942, 14 in March, 33 by June, 67 in September. The crescendo continued upward. October 1943 witnessed the peak when yards completed more than 1,000 Liberty ships in a single month, which meant more than 3 ships launching every single day. Japanese intelligence found itself struggling to process what the numbers actually meant. When neutral observers reported hundreds of new American vessels Appearing in Atlantic ports, Japanese analysts generated alternative explanations that seemed more believable than reality. Perhaps the Americans were counting the same ships multiple times. Perhaps they were including Great Lakes vessels in their totals. Perhaps they were simply fabricating statistics. Any explanation seemed more plausible than accepting what was actually happening. Each Liberty ship represented an enormous coordination challenge across the entire American industrial system. Thousands of tons of steel had to arrive in precisely the correct sequence. Engines manufactured by different companies had to reach the shipyard exactly when they were needed. Components sourced from hundreds of different suppliers had to flow without interruption through complex distribution networks. The organizational capability required to accomplish this proved as impressive as the ships themselves. Reactivated reserve fleet vessels provided crucial support throughout this system. Repair ships could return damaged vessels to service without requiring them to undertake lengthy voyages back to distant shipyards. Tankers extended operational range across vast ocean distances. Munitions ships, despite carrying dangerous cargo, maintained the continuous supply of ordnance that American combat doctrine demanded. The submarine war transforms Japanese submarine commanders occupied a unique vantage point to witness American naval expansion directly. Their patrol reports, often dismissed by superiors as exaggeration, documented the transformation of American naval power with stark clarity. Commander Kanashi Takakazu, commanding I-19, achieved spectacular success in September 1942 when he sank the aircraft carrier USS Wasp. But his subsequent war patrols told a different story. Convoys grew larger and denser with each passing month. Escort screens became thicker and more aggressive. Air patrols seemed continuous. By 1943, attacking American convoys had become nearly suicidal for submarine crews. The evolution of American anti-submarine warfare, enabled by industrial abundance and production capacity, fundamentally transformed the Pacific War. Escort carriers, many converted from merchant ship hulls, provided continuous air cover far beyond traditional air bases. Destroyer escorts produced in remarkable numbers hunted submarines relentlessly and effectively. Radar and sonar systems improved continuously as American technology raced ahead. By late 1943, Japanese submarines had largely abandoned offensive operations against American shipping. Instead, they attempted desperate supply runs to isolated garrisons cut off by American advances. The hunters had transformed into prey, forced to avoid detection rather than actively seeking targets. One bitter submarine commander noted with dark humor that the Americans seemed to have built a destroyer for every ton of rice Japan still possessed. The shipyard system at peak efficiency, Kaiser's Richmond complex, exemplified American production methods operating at their maximum capability. The yards ran continuously without pause, maintaining constant activity through day shifts and night shifts, working around the clock. The prefabrication system had evolved to remarkable sophistication and precision. Major ship sections were fabricated in separate assembly areas, operating simultaneously. Bow sections, weighing over 200 tons, were constructed as complete units. Stern sections were built with propeller shafts already installed and tested. Deck houses arrived fully equipped with all necessary plumbing and electrical systems already in place. These enormous sections were then assembled on the building ways, like complex three-dimensional puzzles coming together piece by piece. The workforce included unprecedented numbers of women, comprising perhaps 25 to 30% in some facilities, and minorities previously excluded from industrial work. Discrimination certainly persisted in various forms, and opportunities remained limited. Yet the war had forced open industrial positions that had previously remained completely closed to these groups. The average worker possessed less than a year's experience with shipbuilding, yet productivity exceeded pre-war standards consistently. Supporting infrastructure proved equally impressive in scope and capability. Miles of railroad track moved materials continuously throughout the yards. Massive cranes, some specially engineered to handle weights that traditional shipbuilders insisted could never be lifted, moved sections into position with mechanical precision. Machine shops, foundries, and assembly areas operated in closely coordinated sequences, each feeding materials to the next in the production chain. Japan's military leadership grasped the reality of their position at different moments, but the pattern was grimly consistent. After the early triumphs, doubt crept in gradually. Then suddenly the mathematics became impossible to deny. The Marianas' defeat in June 1944 changed everything. What American pilots called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot demonstrated just how overwhelmingly superior American naval power had become. Task Force 58 arrived with more carriers, battleships, and escort vessels than Japan's entire pre-war Imperial Navy possessed. The destruction was staggering. Japanese naval aviation was essentially wiped out. Over 400 aircraft were lost, while American losses remained below 30. Admiral Toyoda Soemu, who commanded the combined fleet, would later admit that after the Marianas, he understood the war was finished. The Americans had constructed a navy Japan couldn't hope to fight. They controlled supply lines Japan couldn't cut. Their industrial machine dwarfed Japan's production capacity. Then came the B-29 bombers, appearing over Japanese cities in late 1944, flying from bases in the Marianas. These massive aircraft made American superiority suddenly visible to ordinary civilians. Japanese fighters could barely reach the altitudes where these bombers operated, and interception attempts rarely succeeded. Each bomber represented something Japan couldn't match. Sophisticated American industrial capability, mass-produced at a scale Japan found incomprehensible. Even as Liberty ships continued rolling out of American shipyards, improvements were already underway. The Victory ship represented the next evolution, addressing limitations of the earlier Liberty design while preserving the mass production advantages that made them so effective. These new vessels proved faster, stronger, and more efficient than their predecessors. Speed was the crucial breakthrough. Liberty ships maxed out around 11 knots, leaving them vulnerable to submarine attack and extending voyage times dangerously. Victory ships achieved speeds of 15 to 17 knots. This was enough to outrun surface submarines and cut journey times substantially. The improved designs also eliminated structural weaknesses that had caused some Liberty ships to develop dangerous cracks during service. The smooth transition from one ship type to another showed how effectively American industry could adapt. Shipyards shifted their entire production lines from Liberty to Victory ships without major disruptions. Workers mastered new techniques while keeping productivity high. By mid-1944, Victory ships were rolling off the ways with the same speed as Liberty ships had in earlier years. More than 500 Victory ships would eventually be built, with many remaining in service for decades after the war ended. Their longevity proved that mass production, when managed properly, didn't mean sacrificing quality. Volume and durability could go hand in hand. The people working in these shipyards represented America's transformation. Women took on jobs once considered impossible for their gender: welding, riveting, operating heavy cranes. African Americans gained access to skilled positions that had previously been closed to them, though discrimination remained a constant obstacle. Kaiser's influence extended far beyond the factory floor. The health system he created to keep workers healthy and productive pioneered prepaid medical coverage. Round-the-clock childcare centers allowed workers to maintain full schedules. Housing developments sprang up instantly to shelter the workforce. Vanport City near Portland became the second-largest city in Oregon virtually overnight, housing over 40,000 residents. These weren't charitable gestures, but strategic investments in productivity. A healthy worker produced more. A worker with reliable childcare could take any shift. A worker living close to the shipyard wasted less time traveling. Every obstacle to production was identified and systematically removed. The results were extraordinary. The labor hours required to build a Liberty ship had dropped to about one-third of what was needed in early 1942. Work itself had been fundamentally transformed. By 1945, the numbers made American victory mathematically unavoidable. The Philippines campaign showed that American forces could concentrate overwhelming power anywhere in the Pacific. Invasion fleets contained hundreds of vessels, supported by supply chains stretching thousands of miles across open ocean. At Iwo Jima, the concentrated firepower exceeded anything military history had recorded. The preliminary bombardment alone consumed more ammunition than entire nations possessed. Off Okinawa, the assembled fleet surpassed 1,400 vessels, likely the largest naval concentration ever brought together. Japan's kamikaze campaign, a desperate gamble to inflict unbearable losses through suicide attacks, achieved tactical success but strategic failure. Dozens of ships went down, hundreds more suffered damage. In earlier wars, such losses would have forced withdrawal. Against American production capacity, these losses were simply absorbed and replaced. By summer 1945, American naval forces operated with an abundance of resources that would have seemed like fantasy in 1941. Damaged vessels returned to combat. Lost ships got replaced. The mathematics had become completely overwhelming. The atomic bombs that concluded the war obscured a fundamental reality. Japan had already been defeated by conventional industrial warfare. The bombs hastened surrender, but didn't create the defeat. That defeat had been manufactured in American shipyards. Between December 1941 and August 1945, American yards produced over 5,000 merchant ships, totaling more than 50 million deadweight tons. Japan's production was a fraction of this. American shipyards built more tonnage in single months than Japan built in entire years. Beyond just the numbers, American ships got steadily better. Quality standards improved even as production soared. Innovation continued throughout the entire mass production process. This combination, sheer volume, rising quality, and relentless improvement, proved unstoppable. Admiral Land's Maritime Commission had orchestrated victory through logistics. Ships were constructed faster than enemies could destroy them. Crews were trained faster than enemies could kill them. Victory came through industrial mathematics, pure and simple. When Japanese officers were interrogated after the war, they described how they gradually recognized their position's hopelessness. The initial successes had seemed to prove their strategy correct, yet each subsequent battle revealed Americans growing stronger while Japan weakened. One senior commander laid out a brutal timeline. After Midway, we had lost the initiative. After Guadalcanal, we lost momentum. After the Marianas, we had lost the war. After the Philippines, we simply waited for the end. After Okinawa, we could only pray for it. The realization on the Japanese home front came slower but inevitably. Government propaganda kept promising victory even as cities burned to ash. Yet the B-29 raids, naval bombardments, and submarine blockade made the truth impossible to hide. By spring 1945, most Japanese people knew the war was lost, though few possessed the courage to say so openly. The refusal to accept mathematical reality cost hundreds of thousands in unnecessary deaths. Continuing to fight against impossible odds wasn't strategy, it was pure denial. The atomic bombs provided a convenient justification for surrender, for what American shipyards had already decided. The capabilities revealed by fleet reactivation and the subsequent shipbuilding explosion demonstrated mobilization potential that transcended conventional military understanding. When democratic nations unified for total war, they could achieve mobilization that authoritarian societies couldn't fathom. The manufacturing techniques developed, prefabrication, modular assembly, workforce specialization, would influence global industry for generations. The social transformations, women entering industry, minorities gaining skilled positions, employers providing health care, would permanently reshape American life. Japanese intelligence failure wasn't fundamentally about gathering information. It was about understanding what they collected. Cultural mindsets and established military doctrine created filters that distorted reality. They could count ships without comprehending the system that produced them. They could observe factories without imagining their true potential. They grasped tactics, but not logistics. The contrast was absolute. Japan brought sophisticated tactics, battle-hardened crews, and spiritual resolve. America brought production capacity, organizational systems, and mathematical certainty. In industrial warfare, production trumps courage. Logistics beats tactics. Numbers overcome spirit. When democracy mobilizes for total war, the results reshape global power. The reserve fleet that returned to service in 1941 became part of a vast transformation. The shipyards, steel mills, and training centers across the nation worked in concert. Japanese miscalculation wasn't simply poor intelligence. It was fundamental blindness to American society's mobilization potential. They perceived peacetime inefficiency without recognizing wartime capacity. They counted existing ships without understanding how the production system would eventually overwhelm them. They prepared for a battle-driven war while America prepared for a production-driven one. Henry Kaiser and his contemporaries didn't merely build ships. They revolutionized manufacturing itself. Their methods would reshape industry worldwide. The social changes they sparked would transform America. The organizational systems they created would define modern logistics. Both triumph and tragedy mark this human dimension. American workers achieved manufacturing miracles. Japanese forces fought with courage against mathematical impossibility. Civilians everywhere paid war's price. The outcome wasn't determined by military valor, but by industrial capacity. Those lessons remain vital today. Industrial strength still underlies military power. Production capacity still dictates strategic possibilities. Democratic societies still possess mobilization capability that surprises those who see only their peacetime shortcomings. The vessels that departed American shipyards carried more than cargo. They carried proof that industrial democracies could shift from peacetime comfort to wartime dominance with speed and scale that shattered every assumption about modern warfare's possibilities. American workers constructed more than ships in those yards. They built a new world order, vessel by vessel. The mathematical truth was inescapable. America built ships faster than Japan could sink them, trained crews faster than Japan could kill them, produced supplies faster than Japan could destroy them. This represented more than victory. It was a transformation of warfare itself. The age of decisive battles had passed. The industrial warfare era had arrived. Japan experienced this transition through devastating defeat. The empire, appearing invincible in December 1941, lay in ruins by August 1945, defeated not by better tactics, but superior production, not by greater valor, but greater capacity. The reserve fleets rising from American waters unleashed an industrial wave that converted the Pacific War from military struggle to mathematical inevitability. Japan's own post-war resurrection employed the very methods that had destroyed it. Japanese shipyards adopted American production techniques. Japanese companies embraced mass production. The war's lessons transformed Japan from military power into economic force, proving that industrial capabilities winning wars could also build peaceful prosperity. The reserve fleet story ultimately transcends ships. It reveals how warfare itself was fundamentally transformed. When industrial power combines with national determination, when democratic societies commit entirely to total war, when production becomes strategy, traditional military thinking becomes irrelevant. Those vessels didn't just help win a war. They demonstrated that the factory floor had become as decisive as the battlefield. The assembly line rivals the battle line. Industrial arithmetic stands as the ultimate victor.